Auf Klipper, hi friends, Darth Momo here, and today we're going to talk about the original Star Wars Episode 4 novelization. Recently I got a chance to pick up a copy of the Star Wars trilogy. It's a combination of the 3 film novels, and reading through the Episode 4 novelization was quite the experience. There's a lot that was different and unique. It was really cool, so I kind of just wanted to do a quick little video talking about it. So first things first, most of the film novels, at least pre-Disney, came out about a month or so before the actual film did, which, ironic thinking about, or it's kind of funny to think about reading about Darth Vader being Luke's father as opposed to watching it on screen, but the Episode 4 novelization actually came out in November of 1976. So that was a whole 7-8 months before the film released. Normally the films and the books are pretty similar. There's not too much of a drastic difference between them because they're written, and produced in kind of tandem with one another. But this was based off of the shooting script. And as we know, there was changes on set. There was also a lot of changes in the editing room. So there's a lot that doesn't reflect the film in the novel. And it was really interesting. Like, for example, in the conference room scene, it's Admiral Mahdi, or not Mahdi, it's, what's his name? Starts with a T. Tag. General Tag that gets choked by Vader, not Mahdi. But on top of that, too, there's differences like, for example, we all know in the editing room, Luke's second trench run on there was originally 2 trench runs on the Death Star. The first one was cut in the editing room, and that pops up in the book, where also he is blue 5, not red 5, because the blue didn't work with the blue screen, so they had to change blue squadron to red squadron and red squadron to gold squadron. And then also in the novelization based off the shooting script, the whole Leia hologram scene happens first before Luke gets told about who his father is, etc. Because that was swapped around in the editing room. So there was lots of little differences there. Oh, Darth Vader and the Stormtroopers also burst onto the Tana V4. They burst through like the roof as opposed to boarding the ship like we see in the movie. So lots of differences. But perhaps what was coolest was because this was, for all intents and purposes, the first Star Wars release ever. This was released before the film, and then this was before, Lucas really had the sequels planned out, and then of course, going back and later doing the prequels, and then all the EU content and everything that got us to where the franchise is now. So this was kind of just a singular story, and it was really interesting to see what lined up, what didn't. At the very beginning, there's actually a prologue that pretty much just has like the backstory of like, hey, this is how the Republic fell, who the rebels are, what the Jedi were, and how they fell, etc. And it's kind of interesting how, even though some of the minor details varied, a lot of what was in that prologue actually still pretty much for the most part lines up with what we see in the prequels. And this came out over 20 years before the Phantom Menace came out, so that was kind of cool. But there are also some differences. For example, like Obi-Wan just kind of makes a remark of like, yeah, I don't really know why Anakin fell to the dark side. You could tell it's pretty clear Lucas didn't have all of it completely figured out, and it's pretty clear that they weren't really in on the whole I am your father revelation thing. Also, too, there's a mention that Darth Vader has served multiple emperors, which is interesting because the prologue says the first emperor was Palpatine. So yeah, that was kind of interesting. Like I said, it's fun, it's unique. Obviously it doesn't line up with what we know what the franchise is now, completely 100%, but it's still kind of cool to see, like, this is how it was back in the day before obviously the other 5 movies in Lucas's saga have come out now. But also there were some other cool things too, like for example, Han mentions that little scene where Luke is, he asks Luke, like, hey, what do you think of her? You think a guy like me and a princess? And Luke's like, no. And Han just kind of smiles. Like, to me, that's always just come off as Han just having fun with Luke. It was never meant to be, hinting at any sort of relationship between Han and Leia, which obviously that's where the later movies went down. But in the novel, Han says he's kind of like, he thinks to himself and he's baffled. He's like, he couldn't tell if he was just saying that to mess with Luke or if he actually, maybe meant that. And I thought that was cool, a little nice bit of foreshadowing and kind of hinting at where their relationship did end up going in the follow-up sequels. Perhaps, though, the biggest critique I would give of the book, though, is Alan, because this was actually, it says it's written by George Lucas, but that's because it was George Lucas's script that Alan Dean Foster just kind of ghost wrote into a novel. For those who don't know, Alan Dean Foster actually wrote the Force Awakens novel. He wrote Splinter of the Mind's Eye, etc., which was the first non-Star Wars film or non-film Star Wars book. But Alan Dean Foster, his writing style, I didn't care for it in this book. To me, when you're writing from like, you know, the book perspective, when you change like a point of view perspective, it seems like normally you'd kind of have a little space in between text, or if you're changing like a scene, for example. And Alan Dean Foster doesn't do any of that. For example, point of view in the droid scene when they're in the Jawa sandcrawler and they're being dropped off with the Lars. Initially, it's kind of following C-3PO's perspective, and then all of a sudden just changes to Luke's perspective. And I was just kind of like, what? Which, of course, in a shooting script, in a screenplay for a film, that's fine, because you need all that kind of various insight to be able to, for the actors to pick up on it, for the director to know what you're doing, etc. That's all very relevant to make sure that gets caught on screen. But in a book, it felt very jarring. So, and it's nothing necessarily personal against Alan Dean Foster. I read the Force Awakens book, and I didn't have an issue with his writing style in that one. But I just didn't care for how he basically just took the script and put it into a book in the Episode 4 novelization. Also, too, like I said, like the jumping from scenes, like suddenly we'd be following Darth Vader and Luke in like their TIE fighters, and then all of a sudden we're cutting to Governor Tarkin, you know, and it did that a lot throughout the book, and that got a little irritating as time went on. For the most part, though, I don't really have too much else to say. I did kind of notice, because it includes a lot of the deleted scenes, and some of that stuff, like with Luke and Biggs on Tatooine, you can kind of see some of the prequel-y dialogue, I guess you might call it, seeping through, which was kind of interesting, because, you know, people will say George changed in between the originals and the prequels, and no, George has been the same man since day one. The only other thing I would really say about the novel is it doesn't, for me at least, didn't necessarily work on its own as like a novel. Like, it doesn't have any of the triumph or pizzazz that the film had. This story needed to be told as a film. Like, for example, the whole, like Alderaan, for example, like they don't talk about Alderaan's destruction. It just hints with Governor Tarkin saying, hey, you know, to some Imperial officer, take her off and make sure she has a front row seat of the Alderaan destruction. And then it cuts to Han and Luke on the Millennium Falcon, and then they come out of the hyperspace, and then Alderaan's just gone. It doesn't touch on any of that. But even just like the end moment where like the Death Star blows up, it's just kind of, okay, it's in a million pieces now. Or the whole like throne room ceremony scene at the end, it doesn't have any of the triumph or the impact that it does in the film. It's very much just kind of, okay, yep, they got their medals, cool. Like, even, like, the final, like, I remember even, like, reading the Junior novelization, which I thought the one that came out in 2004, I thought that did a much better job of, like, putting forth some of the oomph in the story. Like, at the end, I remember it saying, like, Luke was no longer just a farm boy. He was the rebel pilot who just blew up the Death Star. But in the novel, it literally ends with Luke just kind of, like, staring off at Leia, like, obviously, I know the original film was hinting that he had some sort of a crush on her, and, you know, it wasn't originally planned for them to be siblings, but knowing where the series went later down the road, only a few years later, it's kind of weird now that it's like, oh, the book, the official novelization of Episode 4, ends off on Luke admiring how beautiful Leia was. So, yeah, it's just, you know, it was kind of cool, and it was fascinating to see what Star Wars once was with this book that's almost 50 years old, will be 50 years old next year, kind of had to say about the franchise and its outlook on it and its perspective. But knowing just where the franchise ended up with, and just how much of an impact the actual film had, and how much changed just between the shooting script and the editing room and the final film, as well as where the following sequels went, yeah, I wouldn't say I really loved it so much as a book. It was more so just the unique experience of what Star Wars was once like through its lens. But that being said, like I said, it was still kind of cool to dive into it. I'd probably give the book, just as a whole, maybe a 6 or a 7. And maybe part of that's just because, hey, I've seen this story, you know, so many times as a film, so it's like I'm not experiencing this as a brand new original story. I'm just experiencing it as an adaptation of a movie I've seen so many times. But Yeah, it's just I wasn't too big of a fan of Alan's writing style in it, and it didn't really have the same pizzazz to the story that the film did, or even later junior novelizations did. Let me know if you. I've started writing or reading through the Empire novelization. I'm about a third of the way through. It's cool, it's fun, but not as much noticeable to comment on as there is with the episode 4 one. So let me know if you want to see me comment on episode 5's and 6's novels. Otherwise, I'll probably just leave it at this. But thank you guys for joining in. Darth Momo out, and may the Force be with you. Always. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. If you liked the video, comment down below and hit that like button. Oh, and check out some of my other videos. I'm sure you'll find them a delight.